We'll go ahead and get started. So today is January 7th, 2021, and today's lesson is going to be about the scientific method. I will then make sure that you all have ample time to complete your asynchronous assignment for the day. Really, we've got two asynchronous assignments today because the exit ticket is a little longer than normal. So I want to make sure that you guys have plenty of time to knock that out. So we'll jump right into it. We'll start with our warm up. Today is Unit 0, Day 3. So you need to navigate to Canvas through NCED Cloud, going through our Unit 0 module, and then click on Unit 0, Day 3 warm up. Per normal, you'll have 6 minutes to complete this warm up. That should be plenty of time.
I need the link for like repair and replace, not like get an entirely new one without replace.
Okay, Lance, I'm going to send an email to Mr. Dickerson and ask him when he's available at the school. I imagine it's just as simple as you being able to go to the school, dropping off the Chromebook, and getting a new one. But I'm not sure what hours he's available to do that. So I'll send him an email and I'll copy you on that email.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So hopefully that was enough time to finish the warm up. And it just simply asks you to look at this graph and then come to a specific conclusion about what you are seeing. So would anybody like to share before I kind of break this down? Would anyone like to share what their conclusion was? What conclusions should we draw from this graph? Or just general observations? Feel free to use the chat if you're a little shy and you're not, or your microphone isn't working. Okay. Well, if we're a little unsure about where to start, whenever we're looking at a graph, we need to first know what that graph is telling us. So this graph is giving us some information about which we can draw a conclusion. On this graph, we've got, like any other graph, a y-axis. Can someone tell me what information is on this graph's y-axis?
The
Good.
rate
So
of photosynthesis?
thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Janelle, Dejan. Okay, now everybody's coming in. All right, cool. So the rate of photosynthesis is indeed on the y-axis. Come back here. So your y-axis is, of course, your vertical axis. It runs up and down. In this graph, we're being told that the rate of photosynthesis is represented on this vertical axis, and it's measured in terms of the bubbles of oxygen released. So photosynthesis, does anybody actually, before I say it, does anyone have any idea as to what photosynthesis is?
Plants use photophores to use light as energy.
Good. So you are on the right track. They use light to create food. Good. So Ana said it in the comments. And then they use that food to create energy. So Lance, you kind of pushed it all together. There's another step that we'll talk about later in the course that's required to actually make the energy. But photosynthesis is the process of using light to make glucose, which is basically food. And we'll talk way more about all of these things, but I'm glad that you guys already have some idea. But in the process of using light to make food, oxygen is produced. So all of the plants that you all will see outside of your houses, including grass, including different types of weeds, including different types of moss, including trees, including flowers, they all undergo photosynthesis and they're all producing oxygen. And so that oxygen is the same oxygen that you and I breathe. So it's a pretty cool cycle. And again, we'll talk much more about this later and throughout the course. But we can measure how much photosynthesis is taking place simply by collecting bubbles and determining how much oxygen is being released. So that's a pretty cool process. What about on the x-axis? What's on the x-axis here? Should be a pretty simple one.
Light intensity.
Yeah, thank you to John and thank you, JT. So we can see on the x-axis, which is our horizontal axis that runs from right to left, we can see that we have light intensity. And this one is just measured in arbitrary units. There are ways of measuring light intensity that use actual units, but that would be much more advanced. And so we're just given arbitrary units here. So now that we've broken down the graph, we at least know what it's telling us, which measurements are represented and plotted on the graph. Now we can start to come closer to a conclusion. Another observation that I want to make about this graph and about the curve on the graph is that it's kind of like a hill. It starts off steep, but it starts to level off and plateau as you move up the graph. That's going to be important when we think about our conclusion as well, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and share it so we're not spending too much time on this warm-up right now, but this is essentially the conclusion that we would hope to see, right? This is good scientific writing. You want to see the words increase and decrease and relationship and things like that in your discussion of a conclusion. So what I wrote, as the scientist moves the plant closer to the light source, the light intensity, what do you all think, increases or decreases? We're moving closer to the light source.
Increases.
It's going to increase, good. And as that happens, as the light intensity increases, the rate of photosynthesis, what happens to the rate of photosynthesis? Does it increase or decrease?
Also increase.
It also increases. And this is supported by what we see in the graph. As the light intensity increases, meaning as we move to the right, we're going from 0 to 2, 4 to 6 to 8, so on and so forth. As we increase in light intensity, we can also see that the graph is going up as well. So we're increasing in the rate of photosynthesis as well. So this means that they are directly correlated. They're directly proportional to one another. As one goes up, the other also goes up. It goes on to say, however, at a certain point, more light doesn't necessarily increase the rate of photosynthesis. So the graph levels off. We can see that happening right at about a light intensity of 10. Even though we're still adding light, we're getting closer and closer to the light source, the rate of photosynthesis is no longer changing that much. It is still going up a little bit, but it's not going up nearly as much as it did in the first 2 units or in the second 2 units, or even in the third 2 units. It started to slow down. Okay, so that's the kind of conclusion in scientific writing that you all want to be able to practice. And we're going to get more practice with that as the semester goes on. But of course, being able to not only depict information on a graph, but also to analyze information from a graph, that's an essential skill that I think will benefit you regardless of, if you plan on becoming a scientist or not. Okay. So again, we want to get in the habit of having a daily objective and a daily essential question. That gives us a direction for our lesson, and it gives us a goal. It tells us what we're hoping to accomplish by the end of the lesson. So this acronym SWBAT stands for students will be able to. Sometimes you'll see it BWBAT, which is just biologists will be able to. It doesn't matter. As long as you see that WBAT, it means something will be able to. Would anybody like to read the objective for today really quickly?
Students will be able to identify and apply steps in a scientific method.
Excellent. Thank you, Lance. And would anyone like to read the essential question?
Why is it important to follow those steps of the scientific method when testing a hypothesis?
Thank you, JT. So that's where we're going with this lesson. You should be able to answer that question by the end of this lesson. Sometimes I think I will ask you all to write down the objective and the essential question. It's just a good way to stay organized. And then you can come back to your notes later on and say, okay, well, this was my goal. This is what I can go back and take from these notes. But if you're confident in your abilities to take these good notes and take efficient and effective notes, as we discussed yesterday, then you're good to go. Before we actually talk about it, though, I want to draw a connection between our lesson today, the scientific method, and things that you may have seen in the news yesterday. So without being too political, I think we can agree that the disruption of democratic processes in our nation's capital is not productive, and it's the antithesis of what most politicians in our country stand
And
for.
terrorism.
And most people would go so far as to call it terrorism, yes. But what I want to tell you all is that this scientific method that we're talking about today is not relevant solely to biology. It's not relevant solely to chemistry. It's not relevant solely to physics or any hard science in general. The scientific method gives you the skills and the language to be able to approach any problem with critical thinking. And it pressures you, it motivates you to have to support your opinions with fact. And so what we saw yesterday take place in our nation's capital, and I'll give you a little bit of an update for those of you who may not have seen it, but what we saw yesterday was the opposite, the antithesis of a solid scientific method. We saw a lot of people who have been misled by one source or another. Sometimes they've been misled by a political leader. Sometimes they've been misled by a media corporation. Sometimes they've been misled by friends and family members on social media. But whatever the source is, some of these people have been misled, and they haven't pushed themselves to actually try to support with evidence their beliefs. And if they did, they would find that many of the reasons why they began a protest that eventually de-escalated or devolved into violent riots, many of those reasons are not actually real. So what I want you all to consider is that regardless of what you're interested in, I want to be real with you and say that, I know many of you are not going on to become biologists, and that's fine. Many of you will go on to become many other things: journalists, good parents, mechanics, pilots, whatever you all choose to do. You will run into problems, and you will have to be able to employ this scientific method thinking. You'll have to say, now that this problem has come up, how can I better inform myself about this problem? What research do I need to do? How can I seek help? What procedures do I need to put in place in order to pursue some type of solution to this problem? How can I support my beliefs with actual evidence such that people will actually believe what I'm saying when I tell them that I've arrived at a logical conclusion? And so these are things that we need to be aware of, because they're not just relevant to science. They're not just relevant to high school. They're not just, me as your teacher just trying to get you to do something extra. These things have real world applications. We saw people lose their lives in these demonstrations and these riots yesterday. We saw people be severely injured. We saw our democracy look horrible on the global stage. And so it's more than just a scientific method that we like to talk about at the beginning of a science class. It's about pushing yourself to think maturely, to think methodically, and to think critically about everything that you're doing. So I wanted to put that out there. Now, for those of you who don't know, yesterday there were supporters of our president who went to our nation's capital in order to stop the certification of our new president-elect, Joe Biden. He was elected president in November, but it wasn't until yesterday that the United States Senate was supposed to certify that election and actually name him the president-elect. That does not mean that they have the power to say yes or no. He becomes president. The people have the power to do that, and they did exercise that power in November. In that time, since November, there have been a number of lawsuits that certain people have taken out or have enacted in order to get that election devalued, and they have been unsuccessful in doing so. But yesterday, people went to try to stop this certification process. They successfully breached the Capitol, which caused senators and representatives to have to go into hiding. And it was a scary scene. A woman did end up losing her life as a result of police shooting, and several other people died as a result of these events as well. So it was a scary and stressful day for everybody. And I just want to encourage you all to take some time away from your phones, away from traditional news media. If you'd like to sit around and watch MSNBC or Fox or CNN, whatever it is, take some time away, put down TikTok, Instagram, Clubhouse, whatever you're using these days, YouTube, put it all down for a while. Just try to process your own thoughts. Just try to make sure that you're checking in with yourself and making sure you're not too stressed out. We want everybody to be mentally healthy in a time that is, the last year has been extremely trying for everyone. So I want you all to take care of yourself. You're young adults. You're people who have a lot on your plates, but you still have a lot of life to live. So don't stress yourselves out too much. I'm glad to know that some of you are engaged, but at the same time, these things can be damaging to your psyche and to your moods if you give them too much attention. So just be aware of that. Okay, that was my spiel. Now we'll go into biology. So I do want you all to, did anybody have anything to share before I jump into anything else?
They were letting, they didn't breach, they were letting.
Okay, so yeah, there are some
Video proof.
What'd you say?
Videos of the police opening the gates.
Right. So yeah, there have been some reports that the resistance to these people breaching or entering the Capitol campus was not sufficient, and some people have said that they have been let in. So either way, not good. I mean, even if they had resisted, as you can see in this picture, there's clear resistance being put up. It wasn't enough, and it's discouraging to know that the security was not in place.
The president referred to.
That's also true. Yes. Okay, we'll move on. So I do want you all to take notes, and in your notes, again, you can take virtual notes, you can take pen and paper notes, whatever is your preference, I'm fine with that. But as long as you have some way of capturing and chronicling what we talk about in class, that's going to be good with me. One thing I do want you to take note of is that we had 2 assignments yesterday that I don't want you all to forget about, and I don't want you to get caught up and left behind, because we are going to move forward. And this Google folder assignment was extremely important because we're going to use that Google folder throughout the semester. So please make sure that you've done that, or if you have not yet done them, please make sure you have a plan to do them before Monday. After Monday, the assignments will still be counted. I'll still take them, but there will be a late penalty unless otherwise communicated. Okay. And then also one other reminder, there is an assignment that I have for your guardians or your parents or your family members or your mentor, your aunt, uncle, whoever is going to be the adult who is holding you accountable, who is supporting you, and who is going to sing your praises this year. Nico, I'm pretty sure I did, yeah. But as long as you save it in your Google folder, then I'll have access to it. So everything that you do, just save it in your Google folder, and you'll know that I have access to it because I have access to your Google folder. Okay, so let's just get in the habit of doing that. But this student champion contact form, I'm not going to use this to punish you all. I'm not going to use it to bother your parents. I really like to contact family members or just people who are supportive of my students in general, just to say, hey, I'm proud of them for doing this today. I want to remind you that we have this coming up. So please do make sure that I have their accurate contact information. Contact information is not always up to date in PowerSchool. But if you go into our Unit 0 module, under Unit 0 Day 1, you should see that there's a student champion contact form. Okay, so this is not for you all to fill out. This is for you to share with a guardian or someone who you trust and who's going to hold you accountable this semester. That way I have their contact information and I can reach out to them. Now, I just got a good question from Sally, so I'm going to demonstrate this really quickly. All right. Okay, so when you have a Google Doc or a Google presentation or Google Sheets, anything that you have in your Google Drive, you can save it to a folder by clicking on File right here in the top left. Where is it? Okay, yeah, there it is. It took a while for it to come up. Once you click on File, you should see this icon right here. It looks like a folder with an arrow on it, and it says Move. You can also see that that same icon is up here, and it also says Move. So I can click on this, and ideally, you know, your entire drive will come up. You'll just have to use these arrows to move throughout your drive. So let's say that I wanted to save this to Sally's folder, even though I'm not going to do that. I would just have to navigate through all these different folders. As you guys can see, I have quite a few. You probably won't have this many, but you know, it helps to be organized. So I just move through and then I click on this last folder and I can click on Move here. So this is how you save things in your Google folder. Excellent question, Sally. If you need help doing that later, I'm happy to help you again, or I can just like record a video later on. So just let me know if you need more help. Okay. All right. So we've got a cool icon or diagram here. This is a flow chart that kind of walks you through how the scientific method works. It walks you through the general steps of the scientific method. I'm sure you all have heard about the scientific method in elementary school. If not then middle school. And if not then in earth and environmental science. So I won't spend too much time on it, but this flowchart is helpful. We're going to go through each of the steps. First, you need to start with a question. But, I'm sorry, the definition of the scientific method is a planned, organized approach to solving a problem. These approaches can vary in so many different ways. There are so many different types of methods that a scientist can employ. Additionally, people from all different types of backgrounds and occupations have to do some version of the scientific method. So it's not just scientists, even though we have that word scientific there as a descriptor. We also see journalists doing their own form of the scientific method. a journalist who's investigating what happened on the Capitol yesterday. They'll have to ask themselves a question. For example, how did security lapse in the way that it did? Then they have to ask themselves that question. Now they need to do research. Well, who are the Capitol Police? Who's the chief of the Capitol Police? What's the layout of the Capitol campus? Then they need to construct a hypothesis. They would say, well, it's most likely that the plans that were in place simply couldn't account for the thousands of people who were on the Capitol yesterday. And then they need to test that out. They need to see, well, has there ever been thousands of people on the Capitol for a demonstration before? And they need to say, oh, yes, it has happened before. So what was different this time? So we see that same general thinking in the line of a journalist. We can think about an entrepreneur doing the same thing as well. Why is my product not selling like I want it to? Well, do some background research. I'm getting these customer reviews and customers are saying that the product doesn't work as well as they want it to, so they switch to a different provider. Oh, well, then I need to construct a hypothesis. Why is my product not working like it should? It's not getting as hot as it should, as quickly as it should. Let's say it's a curling iron or something like that. So I need to test that out. Is it because my wires are faulty? Is it because the metal that I use in the curling iron is not strong enough, is not conducive enough? So you need to do all of these things regardless of what occupation you're in. Why is that? We all run into problems. Even as a teacher, I run into a problem. When I look at the test average and I see, my students did not do well on the Unit 3 test. Why did that happen? Okay, well, it was because we shortened the unit this year. We didn't give enough time to the students. So we need to make sure that we go back into Unit 4 and add some days to that so we can recover some material. So when we experience problems, even in our day-to-day lives, we put this scientific method into practice. We have to think through some background research. We have to think through the construction of a hypothesis. We have to go through a procedure, and it's helpful regardless of what your job is. The other thing I want to point out to you all on this slide, which you'll notice throughout our semester, is that there will be highlighted words, phrases, and sentences that I encourage you all to write down. That's why I highlight them. There will be other words, phrases, and sentences that are not so important and you won't see them highlighted. That doesn't mean that you don't need to write them down or that you shouldn't write them down or that you can't write them down. It just means that your focus is really going to need to be on these highlighted words and phrases, okay? So keep that in mind. You might see them highlighted in yellow. And then I also know that I have some students who, for whom English is not their first language. So you might see me translate some of these terms and phrases at times, and you'll see that highlighted in green. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so yes, of course, the first thing you do is identify a problem. Sometimes you don't need to actually identify the problem. Sometimes the problem comes to you. So it just kind of depends, but you identify the problem, and then you form a question about the problem, and then you have to state the purpose. What's the one-word question that comes to mind when we think about the word purpose? What question, the one-word question that comes to mind when we think about the word purpose? Excellent, Michelle. Yeah, we should be thinking about the word why. The word why is really asking, what's the purpose? And anytime you're doing some type of experiment, you should be able to communicate why you're doing that experiment. Why does this problem matter? What are the implications of this problem? Why should society care about solving this problem? So being able to know the purpose yourself and being able to communicate that purpose is extremely important. Excellent job, Michelle. So the second step then is to do some research. What are some types of research that you all are familiar with?
Using Google or Wikipedia.
Good. So Google and Wikipedia, a lot of people you may have heard say that Google and Wikipedia are not reliable sources. I would challenge that. I would just say that if you are a responsible user of those sources, then they can be reliable sources. But just like anything, if you're using them irresponsibly and if you're not being skeptical of the things you're seeing, then of course you could end up finding some information that is inaccurate. Anything else? What are some other types of research? What if you're a historian? What kind of research would you do if you're a historian?
Looking at first-hand accounts and or like pictures, diaries, those kinds of things.
Good. So maybe you would look at some primary sources, which would be someone who was actually alive at the time, and you read that person's diary, or you're able to look at pictures of that time. What if you are an anthropologist? What kind of research are you doing in that sense? A spell book or a history book? Yeah, you could use a history book. So that would be a secondary resource. So someone who was writing about it, and now you're reading about what they've written, and so you're not actually reading from the direct experience of someone who went through it, but you're reading from someone who also did some research and may have collected some research from primary sources. So that can be extremely useful as well. What about if you're, like I said, what about a paleontologist or an anthropologist? What research do you do in those fields?
You look at fossils and get.
Fossils, yeah, you do field research. So you have to go out into the field and you have to collect samples, and you have to get your hands dirty. And that's the kind of research that you would do in most types of hard sciences. What about if you are what if you're a TV producer and you're trying to come up with a new sitcom? What kind of research would you do in that case?
You look at analytics to see what's popular these days.
Good, excellent. You could do market analytics. You could take a look at what kind of shows are people watching these days. Is Comedy Central a more popular channel, or are most people watching things on YouTube? Do people look at Hulu more than they look at Netflix for these types of comedy shows? So you want to look at what are people watching, how are people spending their money, how are people spending their time, who are the writers, what kind of content is involved. So really, I'm telling you guys, scientific method is not just about science. We see people in all types of fields having to do this type of research. Research just gets you closer to an answer. In the process of doing your research, at some point, you're going to have to come up with a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis?
Educated idea.
Good. Yeah. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as an educated guess, but Lance is correct. So we've got a hypothesis is an educated guess about the outcome of your experiment. It's a prediction. Okay, so typically you'll see it written in if-then format. So you'll say, if this happens, then this should happen. Or if I change this, then I should see this. It's a prediction. And you also can, if you do your experiment and you find out that you're wrong, that your prediction is not correct, there's not necessarily anything bad about that. It might require you to go back and do your experiment a little bit differently, but oftentimes what you're actually trying to do is disprove your hypothesis. So that's something that, that's a little bit more advanced scientific thinking, but some of you who will actually go on to do this type of research will find out that there's something called a null hypothesis that you're trying to disprove as you go through your experiment. But a hypothesis is simply an educated guess. It's a prediction about what's going to happen. Your fourth step is to design the experiment. Okay, so this is arguably the most important step. Before you actually do the experiment, you need to have everything laid out very precisely, very accurately. You need to know what materials you're going to use. You even need to track, in some cases, where you got the materials. You need to know when to use them, how often to use the materials. What solutions are you going to be combining? How should you be combining them? What type of people are going to be involved in the experiment? Okay, so depending on what type of research you're doing or what field you're researching in, you really, really need to design a really tightly controlled experiment. But any good experiment is only going to test one variable at a time. And the variable is anything that's going to change throughout your experiment. In general, there are two types of variables. There's the independent variable and there's the dependent variable. The independent variable is the factor that you are actually manipulating. You're increasing it, you're decreasing it, you're shifting it back and forth, you're changing the amount of time, whatever it is. You're manipulating it. So it's what you're actually testing. The dependent variable is what you're going to measure as a result of those changes. So let's say that we have, we're trying to design an experiment. And our experiment is going to explore the effects of a specific type of steroid on athletic performance. And we've got 5 athletes on whom we're testing this steroid. And we want to know what's the ideal amount of steroid to give someone such that they get the most benefit in a short period of time. So we designed this experiment and we've got these 5 athletes. We want to know how can we improve the amount of weight that they can lift in 1 month's time. Now, for those athletes who are in the class, I'm not at all saying you should be taking steroids. You shouldn't. That's typically illegal by most athletic standards, and it's often unhealthy. But for the purposes of our thought experiment here, we've got 5 athletes, and they're all willing and legally able to sign up to take these steroids. Our variable in this case is probably going to be the amount of steroid that we give. That's going to be the independent amount of variable, or the independent variable. We can manipulate the amount of steroid that we give. We can give the first athlete 5 milligrams. We can give the second athlete 7 milligrams, the third athlete 10 milligrams, so on and so forth. So we're manipulating the amount of variable, or the amount of steroids, in hopes that we can find out what the ideal amount is. In this case, the dependent variable is the amount of weight that they can lift. That's what we're measuring. Okay, so over the course of a month, we want to see how that amount of steroid is going to translate to how much weight they can lift. The steroid is what we're controlling. We actually know every Monday at 7 a.m., we're giving that athlete an injection of 5 milligrams, and that one an injection of 7 milligrams, and that one an injection of 10 milligrams. The dependent variable, what we don't know, we're trying to observe, we're trying to measure this, is how much weight they can lift. So the independent variable is ideally going to have some effect on the dependent variable. If your experiment is really, really poorly designed, though, then there might not be any effect at all. The two things might not be at all correlated. The part of your experimental design, you've got to have 2 other things as well. You've got to have constants, and you've also got to have a control group. So a constant is a factor that does not change during the experiment. For example, as I said, every Monday at 7 a.m., we give the steroid. So you don't want to change that randomly. So 1 week we give it Monday at 7, the next week we give it Tuesday at noon, the next week we give it Friday at 7 p.m. That would throw off the experiment, because now you cannot say with any amount of confidence that the steroid was what was actually affecting the performance. Maybe it was the amount of sleep that they got, or maybe it was the time that they received the injection. So you need to try to control as much about the experience as you can. You need to say, okay, athletes, you need to get this injection every Monday at 7. You need to be getting 8 hours of sleep. So you need to go to sleep by 10 and wake up at 6 every day. You need to eat 2,000 calories every day. So this would be a really difficult experiment to design. You would need to control so much. You need to say, okay, every day when you come into the gym, you need to do these exercises for this amount of time or this number of reps. It would be a very difficult experiment to do, because there would be so many other things that could potentially explain the changes in the independent variable, or in the dependent variable, I'm sorry. So you got to have as many constants as possible. You also want to have a control group. So instead of just having those 5 athletes, all of whom get a shot of the steroid, you also want to have another group of 5 athletes who maybe are just getting a shot of what they think is a steroid, but it's actually just salt water. It's just saline. So it's not doing anything to them at all. They think it's a steroid, but of course, it's not doing anything to enhance their ability. The reason you do this is so that you have a baseline. You know, okay, so people who didn't get any steroid at all, they were able to lift 10% more weights. The guy who got a 5 milligram shot of steroids, he was able to lift 12% more weights in the course of a month. The guy who got 7 was able to do 15% more weights. The guy who got 10 was able to do 20% more weights, so on and so forth. But you need the control. You need somebody who does not receive the treatment at all. Okay, so even when we think about the coronavirus vaccines that have been developed over the last several months, there were control groups in those experiments as well. And those experiments were what we call double blind. That means that they had people who were getting the actual vaccines that were being developed. And they also had people who were getting a sugar pill or a shot of saline, which had nothing in it. It was not actually a vaccine. But the thing about it, the reason it's called double blind is because neither the people getting those things nor the doctors themselves know who was getting what. Only the actual researchers knew who was getting what. So this thing that they do, that the double blind procedure is put into place so that the doctors can't then go in and say, oh, are you sure you actually feel better today? Or maybe it's just all in your head because you didn't actually get any medicine. Okay, so you want to have that double blind procedure. That way people don't actually know, they can't begin to convince themselves that they actually got the medicine when they didn't, or that they did get the medicine and so that's why they're feeling better. You want to have an experiment designed such that nothing else is going to explain your results besides the factors that you're testing. In this case, nothing else could explain a person getting COVID-19 or not getting COVID-19 besides their exposure to that vaccine. Okay. And then lastly, our last 3 steps of the scientific method. Obviously, you need to make strong observations and you need to collect as much data as possible. Keep in mind that data is a plural word. I know that's kind of weird for us to imagine, but it's actually taken from a Latin word. So the singular version of the word data is datum, D-A-T-U-M. So we should say those data because it's plural. Collect those data. Anyway, strong scientists make a lot of observations and collect a lot of data. Then they can organize those data into graphs, charts, and tables, and they can analyze the data as well. Okay, so graphs, charts, and tables, really those are additional things that are put into place to be helpful. Right? We could really come to the same conclusions simply by looking at a spreadsheet of data if we just laid it all out. But that's not always helpful. It doesn't always drive the point across. So a bar chart can tell you something visually that a spreadsheet can't. A pie chart can tell you something visually that a bar chart can't. So it's up to the researcher, it's up to the scientist to choose the correct graph or the correct way to present their data. Sometimes it is just a table. Sometimes it just makes sense to have a table. But you want to have something that's going to tell the story of your conclusion. And then lastly, you draw your conclusion. You say, based on my observations and based on the data that I have collected, these 2 things are indeed correlated. That's the interesting thing about science. It's very, very rare in science that a researcher can say, this causes this. You're going to hear as you all get older and you take more science classes and math and engineering and technology, you'll hear this statement. Correlation is not causation. Just because two things are correlated does not mean that one causes the other. Just because a person gets up in the morning and brushes their teeth does not mean that waking up forces you or causes the person to grab the toothbrush and do that. Okay, so just because we are able to observe that two things are correlated, they go with one another, that doesn't necessarily mean that one is causing the other. So in science, it's hard to prove that two things have a causal relationship. Typically, all we can say is that we're 95% confident that these two things are directly correlated, which means that they're as close to causation as you can get. Okay. So any questions about anything we've talked about today? If there are no questions, so we've got 20 minutes. Thank you, JT. If there are no questions, we've got 20 minutes to work on our two asynchronous assignments. There's an exit ticket that's a little bit longer than it normally would be, but I think you all should still be able to get it done in the next 20 minutes. The scientific method video Webquest might take a little more time, so you might save that for homework over the weekend or choose to do it tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will have a diagnostic exam. Now, this diagnostic exam, I don't want to scare you all. I'm not grading it based on, on accuracy, excuse me. If you don't do well, that's fine, because we haven't taken biology yet. This is just to give me a baseline so that I can say, all right, so Michelle did this well the first time, then in unit 3, she was up here, then in unit 6, she was up here. So this just gives me a baseline to say, okay, I want to see how you're improving as the semester goes on. I will give you 10 formal points, your first formal points of the semester, just for taking it. All right, so it's not a matter of how well you do. I just want to make sure everybody takes it so that I have a good baseline. We'll do that tomorrow. But today, you do have these two assignments. Let me know if you have any questions or need help accessing them or completing them. I'll be here on mute for the next 18 minutes. Do we stay if we're completely done? I would prefer for you to stay. I mean, obviously, I don't know what you're doing on the other side of that screen, but I'd prefer if you do just stay in the call. That way, if I need to, come off of mute and say something, you'll still be able to hear me.
When does class end?
In less than 60 seconds. I'm sending that email now, Lance.
Okay.
Okay, so it's now 1:20. So you all are good to go ahead and head out and get ready for your fourth block. I appreciate the engagement today, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.
All right. See you tomorrow.
See you.
See you tomorrow.
See you. Have a good day.
Mr. Rudd,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
I don't know if I'm going back to school. I was as a person that was gonna go back to school, but I sent in a request, but I didn't like. I don't know if I'm going back or not.
You sent in a request to do what?
To change for online to stay online.
Okay. And you haven't heard anything back about that request?
No, because I did send in the request late, but the person that we were supposed to email, I emailed her, but we never got a response until like a couple days later. But my dad had already called the school, and they said that the lady that helped them said that she had changed it. But then after we got the email from the lady that I was supposed to send the email to, she said that she was gonna see if they could still accept the request.
Okay. And who are these people who you've been emailing?
The one person I do know that the lady that I was supposed to email was Miss Means.
Okay. Yeah.
I believe that was the one that you were supposed to email, and the lady in the office that helped my dad, I don't know who she was.
Okay. And you never got a response from Miss Means?
No, she just said that she was gonna see if they could still accept the request, but I don't know if they did or not.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't worry about it. It's not like they can. I don't think we're going to punish any students for not coming to school as long as you are still able to get the work done virtually. Um, but I will send an email to Miss Means and I'll copy you on that email and see what she says.
Okay.
And I can also copy our Dr. Potts, the assistant principal, and see what he says as well. So we'll see if we can get to the bottom of it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye bye.